Some people think grief makes a mother weak. They never imagine it can make her unstoppable. Rain drifted softly through the cemetery like a curtain of silver threads, tapping against rows of dark marble headstones beneath the gray October sky. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and dying leaves across Arlington Memorial Gardens, where silence usually belonged to the dead. But that morning, silence belonged to Angela Brooks. She stood alone in front of her son's grave wearing a long black coat that hung heavy against her shoulders, her trembling fingers wrapped around a bouquet of white lilies already soaked by the rain. Her eyes stayed fixed on the polished headstone beneath her, the engraved letters blurred by water droplets. Marcus Elijah Brooks, beloved son, U.S. Navy veteran, gone too soon. 6 years had passed since they buried him, yet the ache inside her chest still felt fresh enough to split her apart every time she visited. She slowly knelt beside the grave, brushing rainwater from the edge of the stone with careful fingers as though her son might somehow feel the gesture. "Happy birthday, baby," she whispered softly. Her voice nearly disappeared beneath the distant rumble of thunder rolling across the Virginia sky. For a moment, everything felt still, peaceful. Then came the sound of boots crushing wet gravel behind her. Angela stiffened slightly, but didn't turn around. She heard the sharp crackle of a police radio first, followed by a man's voice dripping with irritation. "Ma'am, cemetery closes at noon." The voice was cold, impatient. Angela slowly looked over her shoulder and saw Officer Daniel Mercer standing beneath the rain in a dark uniform, one hand resting near his belt while the other held a styrofoam coffee cup. Tall, broad, clean-shaven, the kind of face that had learned long ago how to hide cruelty behind authority. His patrol SUV idled several yards away with flashing lights reflecting across the puddles between the graves. Angela rose carefully to her feet. "I'll be leaving soon," she said quietly. Mercer glanced down at the headstone, then back at her face. Something in his expression shifted the moment he saw Marcus's photograph etched beside the name. His mouth curled slightly. "Military?" he asked. Angela nodded once. "My son." Mercer let out a dry laugh under his breath. "Funny how many so-called heroes end up buried out here." Angela's fingers tightened around the flowers. Nearby, an older couple visiting another gravesite turned toward the sound of his voice. Mercer noticed them watching and straightened his posture immediately, but the smugness never left his eyes. "Need to see some ID," he said suddenly. Angela blinked in confusion. "Excuse me." "You heard me." He stepped closer now, rain dripping from the brim of his cap. "We've had reports of suspicious individuals hanging around after hours." Angela looked around the nearly empty cemetery. "I'm visiting my son." "Could be anybody's grave," Mercer replied with a shrug. "People lie all the time." The words landed harder than the cold rain soaking through Angela's coat. She slowly reached into her purse, but before she could pull out her wallet, Mercer abruptly pointed toward the bouquet in her hands. "Set those down." Angela hesitated. "They're for my son." I said put them down. His voice rose louder this time, echoing across the cemetery. A little girl standing beside her father several rows away stared openly now. Angela carefully lowered the lilies beside the grave. Mercer stepped forward and nudged the bouquet with the toe of his boot, sending muddy water splashing across the white petals. The little girl gasped softly in the distance. "Why is he doing that?" she whispered. Nobody answered her. Angela stared silently at the crushed flowers beside her son's grave, while rain slid slowly down her cheeks like tears she refused to let fall. Mercer folded his arms across his chest, satisfied with the humiliation spreading through the silence around them. But he failed to notice one thing. Just beyond the cemetery gates, parked beneath a row of oak trees, a black sedan sat motionless with its engine running. And behind the windshield, someone was recording everything. Angela slowly bent down and picked the ruined lilies from the mud one stem at a time, while the rain continued falling across the cemetery in soft gray sheets. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the effort it took to keep her composure. Officer Daniel Mercer watched her in silence for a moment before taking another sip of coffee, like the entire scene bored him. "You people always make everything dramatic," he muttered. The words were quiet, but not quiet enough. The older man standing near the nearby gravesite frowned immediately. His wife touched his arm nervously, silently begging him not to get involved. Angela brushed dirt from the white petals with slow, careful fingers. My son served this country, she said calmly without looking up. Mercer shrugged. Does not mean he was perfect. Angela finally raised her eyes toward him. Rainwater slid down the side of her face as thunder rolled faintly in the distance. Neither are you, officer. The sentence hit him harder than she expected. His expression tightened instantly. He stepped closer until only a few feet separated them. Watch your tone, he snapped. I am trying to be respectful here. The little girl from earlier looked up at her father again, confused by the tension hanging in the air. Mercer noticed the attention from the nearby families and immediately straightened his uniform. Men like him understood appearances better than morality. He pulled a small notepad from his pocket and scribbled something down. Angela Brooks. He read aloud from her driver's license after finally glancing at it. 52 years old. Lives alone. Angela said nothing. Mercer tilted his head slightly. No husband. Still silence. Figures. The rain suddenly felt colder. Angela slowly took her identification back from his hand and slipped it carefully into her purse. Am I free to leave now? Mercer looked toward Marcus's headstone again. Funny thing about cemeteries, he said. A lot of people buried here because they made bad choices. Angela stared at him quietly. Deep inside her chest, grief twisted together with something sharper now. Something controlled. Something patient. Marcus was a medic, she said softly. He spent 2 tours saving lives. Mercer let out another dry laugh. That is what they all say after somebody ends up dead. The older veteran, visiting a nearby grave, could not stay silent anymore. That boy served his country, he called out firmly. Mercer turned immediately, annoyance flashing across his face. Mind your business, sir. The veteran stepped forward slowly despite his wife's worried expression. His old Marine Corps cap sat low over silver hair weathered by age and time. I knew Marcus Brooks, he said. Good young man. Angela looked at the veteran in surprise. Mercer's jaw tightened. Conversation is over, he said sharply. Everybody move along. But the atmosphere had already changed. What started as quiet humiliation was beginning to attract attention. Several visitors had stopped walking entirely now. A groundskeeper near the entrance stood frozen beside his maintenance cart watching from a distance. Mercer could feel eyes settling onto him from every direction, and it irritated him more than he wanted to admit. He stepped closer to Angela again, lowering his voice. You should leave before this turns into something else. Angela studied his face carefully for the first time. Beneath the badge, beneath the authority, beneath the arrogance. She saw it clearly now. Fear. Not fear of her. Fear of losing control. Her eyes slowly drifted toward the small body camera clipped to the center of his chest. The blinking red light reflected faintly through the rain. Recording. Every word. Every insult. Every threat. Mercer followed her gaze and instinctively touched the camera with one hand. Problem? He asked coldly. Angela's voice remained perfectly calm. No, officer. In fact, I think that camera may become very important. For the first time since arriving at the cemetery, Mercer stopped smirking. And several yards away beyond the iron gates, inside the parked black sedan, a man wearing a dark federal raincoat lowered a pair of binoculars and quietly picked up his phone. We have enough, he said into the receiver. She was right about him. The rain finally began to ease as Angela Brooks walked slowly toward the cemetery gates with the ruined bouquet pressed against her chest. Behind her, Officer Daniel Mercer remained standing near Marcus's grave with his jaw clenched tight, watching. Her every step like a man trying to convince himself he still controlled the situation. The flashing lights from his patrol vehicle reflected across the wet pavement in streaks of red and blue, casting strange colors across the rows of silent headstones. Angela never looked back. She had learned years ago that men like Mercer fed on reactions. Anger excited them. Fear empowered them. Silence unsettled them. And right now, Mercer looked unsettled. As Angela reached the parking lot, the black sedan parked beneath the oak trees slowly opened its rear door. A tall woman in a dark federal raincoat stepped out holding a leather folder beneath one arm. Her name was Naomi Ellis, senior attorney for the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Sharp eyes, calm voice, the kind of presence that never needed to announce authority because authority already followed her naturally. Angela stopped walking the moment she saw her. Naomi glanced briefly toward Mercer in the distance before speaking quietly. You handled that better than most people could. Angela gave a tired nod. I have had 6 years of practice. Naomi opened the folder slightly, revealing printed photographs, internal reports, and still images from body camera footage. His behavior is escalating faster than we expected, she said. That is good for the case. Angela looked down at the muddy flowers in her hands. It never feels good. Naomi's expression softened slightly. No, she admitted. It does not. Several yards away, Mercer noticed the two women speaking and immediately started walking toward them across the wet gravel. His posture changed the moment he saw Naomi's badge hanging briefly beneath her coat. Not fear exactly, but caution. Everything all right over here? He asked, trying to sound casual. Naomi slowly turned toward him. Perfectly fine, officer. Mercer studied her carefully. And you are? Naomi reached calmly into her coat pocket and handed him a business card. Mercer glanced down at it. His eyes narrowed almost instantly. United States Department of Justice. Civil Rights Division. The air seemed to tighten around him. Federal attorney? He asked carefully. That is correct. Mercer forced out a small laugh. Interesting place for federal attorneys to spend a Saturday afternoon. Naomi slipped both hands into her coat pockets. Interesting place for a police officer to harass a grieving mother. The sentence landed like a crack of thunder between them. Mercer's expression hardened immediately. Nobody was harassing anybody. Naomi tilted her head slightly. Good. Then I assume your body camera footage will support that statement. For the first time all morning, Mercer looked genuinely uncomfortable. His hand instinctively brushed the camera attached to his chest again. Tiny movement. Tiny mistake. But Angela noticed it immediately. So did Naomi. Body cameras protect good officers. Naomi continued calmly. That is what your department says, right? Mercer shifted his weight. You people always twist things. The second the words left his mouth, silence swallowed the parking lot. Even Mercer seemed to realize what he had just said. Naomi's face remained perfectly neutral, but her eyes sharpened. Angela simply stared at him quietly beneath the gray afternoon sky. The groundskeeper near the entrance stopped pretending not to listen. The elderly veteran from the cemetery stood frozen beside his truck. Mercer suddenly looked surrounded by witnesses he had not noticed before. That is not what I meant, he muttered quickly. Naomi stepped slightly closer. Funny, she said softly. Because that camera probably knows exactly what you meant. Mercer's confidence began cracking around the edges now. The smugness was fading, replaced by irritation, by anxiety, by the slow realization that something much larger than a routine encounter might already be unfolding around him. Angela watched him carefully, and for the first time in years, she felt something shift deep inside her grief. Not peace, not satisfaction, something colder, something steadier, hope. Because 6 years earlier, when they buried Marcus Brooks beneath cold October rain and folded an American flag into her trembling hands, everyone told her the same thing. Move on. Let it go. The system protects its own. But standing there now, while a federal attorney stared directly into the eyes of the officer who once helped bury the truth about her son, Angela finally understood something important. Systems only stay untouchable until somebody stops being afraid of them. That night the rain finally stopped over Richmond, but the heaviness in Angela Brooks's chest remained long after the cemetery disappeared behind her. She sat quietly in the passenger seat of Naomi Ellis's black sedan, while city lights drifted across the windows in blurred streaks of gold and white. Neither woman spoke much during the drive. Some pain had lived too long to fit easily into conversation. After nearly 20 minutes, Naomi turned down a narrow residential street lined with aging brick apartment buildings and dim porch lights flickering against the cold evening air. Angela stared out the window as they pulled into the parking lot of a modest 3-story complex tucked between an old laundromat and a closed grocery store. You still live here? Naomi asked softly. Angela gave a small nod. Marcus helped me move in after his second deployment. Naomi looked toward her carefully, but did not reply. Angela stepped out of the car holding the damp bouquet against her chest, while Naomi followed closely behind, carrying 2 cardboard archive boxes from the trunk. By the time they reached apartment 2B, the hallway smelled faintly of old carpet and cigarette smoke drifting from somewhere upstairs. Angela unlocked the door slowly and pushed it open. Naomi stopped immediately when she stepped inside. The apartment looked less like a home and more like the inside of an investigation unit. Entire walls were covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, police reports, maps, handwritten notes, and printed timelines connected by pieces of colored string. One section held enlarged still images from traffic cameras. Another displayed copies of internal disciplinary complaints filed against Officer Daniel Mercer over the past decade. Names, dates, faces, young black men, elderly women, teenagers. Every photograph carried the same expression underneath the fluorescent glare of police booking lights. Confusion, fear, humiliation. Naomi slowly set the boxes down beside a cluttered kitchen table, covered in folders and legal pads. You organized all this yourself? Angela removed her coat carefully and hung it beside the door. Nobody else was going to do it. The room fell quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Naomi stepped closer to one section of the wall where a framed photograph of Marcus Brooks sat surrounded by military ribbons and folded letters. In the picture, Marcus smiled proudly in his Navy uniform beneath bright summer sunlight, his arm wrapped around Angela's shoulders. How old was he there? Naomi asked gently. 27. Angela's voice softened for the first time all day. 3 weeks before he died. Naomi looked down at the stack of documents beneath the photograph. Accident reports, witness statements, internal affairs summaries. Most stamped closed. The official report still says excessive restraint was not a factor, Naomi said carefully. Angela gave a bitter smile. Official reports can say anything when the right people sign them. She walked slowly toward a filing cabinet near the living room window and pulled open the top drawer. Inside sat dozens of neatly labeled folders arranged by year. Naomi watched silently as Angela removed a thick brown envelope marked Mercer. The first complaint against him was 14 years ago, Angela explained. Unlawful stop involving a black college student outside a convenience store. She handed Naomi another file. Then came intimidation complaints. Missing footage. Witness statements that changed overnight. Naomi flipped through the pages slowly. Every incident followed the same pattern. Every investigation disappeared the same way. And nobody stopped him, she murmured. Angela's eyes drifted toward Marcus's photograph again. Some officers wear a badge to protect people, she said quietly. Others wear it because nobody ever taught them what power is supposed to mean. Naomi looked around the apartment once more, finally understanding why Angela never gave up. This was never just grief. It was discipline, patience. 6 years of collecting fragments everyone else ignored. 6 years of refusing to let her son become another forgotten headline buried beneath. Bureaucracy and silence. Then Naomi noticed something else hanging near the far corner of the wall. A printed still frame from a police body camera. Officer Daniel Mercer standing beside Marcus's vehicle on the night he died. Timestamp visible. Audio disabled. Naomi stepped closer slowly. Where did you get this? Angela's expression darkened slightly. Someone mailed it to me 3 years ago with no return address. Naomi stared at the image carefully. Mercer's posture. The angle. The missing audio. Her stomach tightened. This footage was altered, she whispered. Angela nodded once. That is what I have been trying to tell people for 6 years. And somewhere across the city, inside the quiet darkness of his suburban home, Officer Daniel Mercer sat alone at his kitchen table, staring at his phone, while the memory of Angela's calm eyes refused to leave his mind. Officer Daniel Mercer barely slept that night. The clock above his kitchen stove read 2:17 in the morning, yet he still sat alone at the table, wearing the same gray t-shirt from earlier that evening, one hand wrapped around a glass of bourbon slowly melting with ice. The television played softly in the background, muted captions sliding across the bottom of the screen while storm warnings drifted through Richmond County. But Mercer was not watching television. His eyes remained fixed on the body camera sitting beside his phone. The small blinking dock light reflected faintly across the dark kitchen like a warning he could not silence. Angela Brooks had unsettled him in ways he refused to admit out loud. Most people reacted exactly how he expected them to. They argued. They cried. They lost control. Angela had done none of those things. She had simply looked at him with the calm certainty of someone who already knew something he did not. And then there was the federal attorney. Mercer leaned back heavily in his chair and rubbed both hands across his face. Civil Rights Division, he muttered bitterly under his breath. He hated those words. Hated what they represented. Outside, rainwater dripped steadily from the gutters while distant headlights moved across his quiet suburban street. Everything looked Normal. Peaceful. Yet Mercer could feel pressure building around him like walls slowly closing inward. His phone suddenly vibrated against the table. Sergeant Colin Reeves. Mercer answered immediately. What? Reeves sounded irritated already. You made contact with Angela Brooks today? Mercer's jaw tightened. Who told you that? Answer the question. Mercer stood and walked toward the kitchen window, lowering his voice instinctively. Yeah. She was trespassing after hours at the cemetery. Reeves went silent for 2 seconds too long. Federal attorneys showed up afterward, he finally said. Mercer felt heat rise into his chest. How the hell did you hear about that already? Because Internal Affairs heard about it. Mercer froze completely. Across the room, the blinking dock light beneath the body camera suddenly felt impossible to ignore. Reeves exhaled heavily through the phone. Daniel, listen to me carefully. Did you say anything inappropriate on camera? Mercer immediately looked toward the device again. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen window behind him. No, he answered too quickly. Reeves did not sound convinced. You sure about that? Mercer stayed silent. The silence answered enough. Damn it, Daniel, Reeves snapped quietly. Do you understand how bad timing this is? Mercer's voice sharpened. This woman has been targeting me for years. No, Reeves replied coldly. She has been documenting you for years. There is a difference. The words hit Mercer harder than he expected. He stared out at the dark street, while tension crept slowly into his chest. What are they saying? He asked finally. Reeves lowered his voice. They reopened Marcus Brooks's case 3 weeks ago. Mercer's breathing stopped for a second. What? Quiet federal review. Nobody told you because nobody trusts you not to panic. Mercer gripped the kitchen counter tightly now. There was no case, he muttered. The investigation closed years ago. Reeves sounded exhausted. Not according to the Department of Justice. Silence swallowed the line again. Mercer suddenly remembered the old Marine veteran at the cemetery staring at him with disappointment. The little girl, asking why the officer was hurting the woman. Angela calmly watching his body camera like she already knew every mistake he was making in real time. Piece by piece, the memory replayed differently now. Not like a routine encounter. Like a trap slowly closing around him. Listen carefully, Reeves continued. Do not delete anything. Do not alter reports. Do not touch your footage. Mercer swallowed hard. I would not do that. Reeves laughed once without humor. That answer alone is why they are watching you. The line disconnected. Mercer remained standing motionless in the dark kitchen while the refrigerator hummed quietly behind him. Then slowly, almost against his own instincts, he reached toward the body camera dock. His fingers hovered above the device for several long seconds. One decision, one mistake, one impulse born from fear. Outside, thunder rolled softly across the sleeping city while inside apartment 2B on the other side of Richmond, Angela Brooks sat awake beneath a dim lamp, quietly reviewing documents beside her son's photograph. Waiting, patient the way only grief teaches people to be. Monday morning arrived cold and clear over downtown Richmond as reporters gathered outside the federal courthouse beneath rows of towering stone columns and polished glass doors reflecting the pale sunrise. News vans lined the sidewalks while camera crews adjusted tripods beside clusters of attorneys hurrying through security checkpoints with coffee cups and briefcases in hand. Something unusual was happening inside the courthouse that morning, and everyone could feel it. Rumors had already begun spreading through police departments across the state over the weekend. Internal investigations, civil rights violations, possible federal indictments. Most names remained sealed from public release, but one name had quietly started surfacing behind closed doors more than the others. Officer Daniel Mercer. Inside courtroom 7 on the 4th floor, the atmosphere felt heavy with restrained tension. Federal Judge Raymond Keller sat high above the courtroom reviewing documents through thin reading glasses while attorneys whispered urgently at their tables below. The gallery slowly filled with reporters, officers, observers, and families who had spent years waiting for someone to finally listen to them. Angela Brooks sat quietly near the front row beside Naomi Ellis wearing a dark navy suit and holding a leather folder against her lap. Calm, composed, but inside her chest, her heartbeat refused to slow down. 6 years earlier, she had entered another courtroom, carrying hope. She left carrying a folded flag and silence. Today felt different. Naomi leaned slightly toward her. You ready? Angela kept her eyes forward. I stopped being afraid a long time ago. Across the room, Daniel Mercer stepped through the side entrance wearing his dress uniform with every badge polished carefully into place. He moved with forced confidence, jaw tight, shoulders rigid, eyes scanning the courtroom as though searching for allies who no longer looked eager to meet his gaze. Conversations softened immediately when he entered. Even officers seated near the back suddenly became interested in their phones or paperwork. Mercer noticed. Men like him always noticed shifts in loyalty. His attorney, Charles Whitmore, greeted him quietly near the defense table. "Listen carefully," Whitmore whispered. "Do not react emotionally today." Mercer looked toward Angela sitting calmly beneath the soft courtroom lighting. She built this entire thing on accusations. Whitmore adjusted his tie nervously. No, she built it on documentation. Mercer's expression darkened. The sentence sounded far too similar to Sergeant Reeves's warning from 2 nights earlier. At exactly 9 o'clock, Judge Keller entered, and the courtroom rose together beneath the sharp echo of the bailiff's voice. Court is now in session. The room settled into silence. Papers shifted softly. Reporters uncapped pens. Somewhere near the back row, someone coughed nervously. Then Naomi Ellis stood slowly and approached the center of the courtroom, holding a thick stack of files. "Your Honor," she began calmly, "the United States Department of Justice is presenting evidence related to a pattern of discriminatory policing, misconduct, intimidation, and civil rights violations conducted over multiple years by Officer Daniel Mercer." Mercer immediately leaned back in his chair, shaking his head slightly like a man trying to dismiss a nightmare before it fully arrived. Naomi continued without hesitation. "The government will demonstrate repeated abuses of authority targeting African American citizens, suppression of internal complaints, alteration of official records, and deliberate interference with previous investigations." Angela watched Mercer carefully while the courtroom absorbed every word. For years he had spoken to people exactly the way he spoke at the cemetery, because he believed nobody powerful would ever challenge him. But power had changed rooms now. Naomi turned toward the evidence table where several sealed containers waited beneath federal markings. "This case," she said quietly, began reopening after new body camera evidence surfaced connected to the death of Navy veteran Marcus Brooks. The moment Marcus's name echoed through the courtroom, silence deepened completely. Mercer's confidence flickered for the first time. Small, barely visible, but real. Naomi slowly lifted a black evidence drive from the table. "Until recently," she continued, "Officer Mercer believed this footage no longer existed." Mercer's breathing changed instantly. Judge Keller noticed. So did every reporter in the room. Whitmore leaned urgently toward his client, whispering something under his breath, but Mercer no longer seemed to hear him. Because across the courtroom, Angela Brooks finally looked directly into his eyes again. Calm, steady, patient. The same look she gave him beside her son's grave. And in that moment, Daniel Mercer understood something terrifying. This was never about one bad day at a cemetery. This was 6 years of truth arriving all at once. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the federal technician connected the evidence drive to the large monitor mounted beside the witness stand. Every movement suddenly felt louder than normal. The scrape of chairs, the rustling of paper, the nervous clearing of throats from reporters leaning forward with pens ready. Judge Raymond Keller adjusted his glasses while Naomi Ellis stood beside the screen with one hand resting calmly against the evidence table. Across the courtroom, Daniel Mercer sat unnaturally still. His face had lost color beneath the bright overhead lights, but he kept his jaw clenched tight, as if determination alone could hold the room together around him. Angela Brooks watched silently from the front row with both hands folded neatly in her lap. Years ago, she would have trembled in moments like this. Years ago, grief nearly destroyed her. But grief had changed shape over time. It no longer screamed inside her chest. It focused her. Naomi looked toward the judge. "Your Honor, the government would like to present previously suppressed body camera footage recorded on the night of Marcus Brooks's death." A quiet murmur spread through the gallery immediately before Judge Keller raised one hand sharply. Silence returned. Naomi nodded once toward the technician. The screen flickered. Static crackled softly through the courtroom speakers. Then grainy nighttime footage appeared showing the side of a dark highway illuminated by police headlights reflecting across wet pavement. Several people in the courtroom leaned closer instinctively. Mercer stared downward at the defense table. The timestamp displayed September 18th, 6 years earlier. Angela's breathing slowed the moment she saw Marcus's truck appear on screen. She had replayed fragments of this night in her mind thousands of times, but this was the first time she was seeing what really happened with her own eyes. The footage showed Marcus Brooks standing calmly beside his vehicle in jeans and a gray navy sweatshirt, while officers surrounded him beneath flashing lights. Even through the poor audio quality, Marcus's voice remained steady and respectful. "Officer, I already showed my identification." Naomi let the footage continue without interruption. Mercer shifted slightly in his chair. Then another voice entered the recording. Daniel Mercer's voice. Sharp. Dismissive. "You people always have an excuse." Several jurors visibly reacted. A reporter near the back stopped writing entirely. The footage continued, showing Marcus attempting to explain where he was coming from that evening after volunteering at a Veterans Center outside Richmond. His posture remained calm the entire time. Cooperative. Controlled. Nothing like the official report that had described him as threatening and aggressive. Naomi slowly stepped forward. "For 6 years," she said quietly, "this footage was never disclosed to the Brooks family, the original investigators, or the court." Judge Keller's expression hardened visibly now. The video continued. Officers searched Marcus's vehicle while Mercer repeatedly questioned him in a hostile tone completely inconsistent with department policy. Then came the moment that changed the entire courtroom. The original body camera footage suddenly skipped forward by exactly 4 minutes. The screen glitched. Audio distorted briefly. And when the image returned, Marcus was already in handcuffs near the patrol car, while Mercer spoke rapidly into his radio. Naomi paused the video immediately. The government's forensic analysts determined this footage was manually altered approximately 48 hours after the incident. A stunned silence swept through the courtroom. Mercer finally looked up sharply. "That is not proven," he snapped suddenly. His attorney immediately grabbed his arm, trying to quiet him, but the damage was done. Every eye in the courtroom turned toward him now. Naomi calmly lifted another document from the evidence table. "Actually, Officer Mercer, your department login credentials were used to access and modify this file." Mercer's breathing became uneven. "That does not prove I changed anything." Naomi's eyes never left his face. "No," she replied softly. "Your behavior afterward does." Another video clip appeared on screen, this time from the cemetery only days earlier. Mercer standing over Angela beside Marcus's grave while rain fell around them. The courtroom listened in complete silence as his own recorded voice echoed through the speakers again. "Funny how many so-called heroes end up buried out here." Angela lowered her eyes briefly. Some wounds never stopped hurting no matter how much justice arrived afterward. But around the courtroom, something had shifted permanently now. Mercer was no longer being viewed as a respected officer, defending himself against accusations. He was becoming exactly what Angela had spent 6 years trying to show the world. A man who believed power meant certain people never had to answer for what they did. Judge Keller removed his glasses slowly and stared directly at Mercer across the courtroom. And for the first time since entering the building that morning, Daniel Mercer looked afraid. The silence inside courtroom 7 no longer felt ordinary. It felt heavy, dangerous, like the entire building itself was holding its breath, waiting to see who would break first. Daniel Mercer sat frozen at the defense table while the paused image from the cemetery remained projected across the large courtroom screen behind him. There he was beneath the rain, standing over Angela Brooks beside her son's grave with cold arrogance stamped across his face for the entire room to witness. No rewritten report could erase it now. No missing paperwork could soften it. Truth looked different when people could finally see it with their own eyes. Judge Raymond Keller leaned forward slowly, his expression unreadable but far colder than before. "Officer Mercer," he said carefully, "do you dispute the authenticity of these recordings?" Mercer swallowed hard before answering. "The footage does not show the full context." Naomi Ellis stepped forward immediately. "Then perhaps the court should hear the context directly from Mrs. Angela Brooks." Every head in the courtroom turned as Angela slowly rose from her seat near the front row. She walked toward the witness stand with calm, measured steps, her dark navy suit perfectly pressed, her hands steady despite the hundreds of eyes now following her movement across the room. Reporters lifted cameras. Jurors watched closely. Even the officers seated near the back seemed unable to look away. Angela took the oath quietly before sitting beneath the soft courtroom lights. For a brief moment, she looked toward Marcus's photograph displayed on the evidence monitor. Her son's smile filled the room in complete silence. Naomi approached gently. "Mrs. Brooks," she began softly, "why did you continue pursuing this case after 6 years?" Angela folded her hands. "Together. Because my son deserved better than silence." The courtroom remained perfectly still. Naomi nodded once. "Can you tell the court about Marcus?" Angela's eyes softened immediately. "Marcus loved helping people," she said quietly. "Even as a little boy." A faint smile touched her face for the first time all morning. When he was 10 years old, he used to carry extra sandwiches in his backpack because he worried other children at school might be hungry. Several jurors visibly shifted in their seats listening to her. Angela continued carefully. "He joined the Navy because he believed service mattered. He believed people should protect each other." Her voice never cracked, never rose. That calmness somehow made every word hit harder. Naomi slowly placed a document before her. "Mrs. Brooks, when did you first begin suspecting the official report about your son's death was false?" Angela looked directly toward Daniel Mercer for the first time since taking the stand. "The night they handed me his belongings." Mercer lowered his eyes immediately. "There was mud on Marcus's boots," Angela continued. "The report claimed he became violent during the traffic stop. But my son had asthma from his military deployments. He avoided physical confrontation whenever possible because he struggled to breathe under stress." A quiet murmur moved through the gallery. Naomi carefully introduced another exhibit showing Mercer's original written statement beside the altered body camera timeline. "And what did you do after that?" Angela answered without hesitation. "I started listening instead of trusting." Naomi tilted her head slightly. "What do you mean?" Angela slowly glanced around the courtroom. People talk when they think nobody important cares. Her eyes settled briefly on the officers seated in the back rows. Former officers, dispatchers, witnesses, mothers like me. Mercer shifted uncomfortably now, his breathing visibly uneven. Angela continued speaking with quiet precision. "I learned complaints disappeared whenever Officer Mercer's name appeared. Witnesses changed statements. Footage went missing. Reports were rewritten." Judge Keller looked sharply toward the defense table. Naomi stepped closer to the witness stand. "Mrs. Brooks, did Officer Mercer know you were cooperating with federal investigators before the cemetery incident?" Angela shook her head once. "No." Naomi paused carefully before asking the question everyone already knew mattered most. "Then why do you think he treated you the way he did at your son's grave?" Angela's eyes never left Mercer now. "Because he thought grief made me powerless." The sentence echoed through the courtroom like a final piece sliding perfectly into place. Mercer's face tightened instantly. His attorney whispered urgently beside him, but Mercer no longer looked like a confident officer defending his reputation. He looked cornered, exposed, and somewhere deep inside the silence filling courtroom 7, the balance of power had finally begun to change. The tension inside courtroom 7 felt almost unbearable now, thick enough to silence even the restless movement of reporters shifting in their seats. Angela Brooks remained calm on the witness stand while Daniel Mercer sat frozen at the defense table, staring downward with both hands clenched so tightly his knuckles had turned pale beneath the courtroom lights. For years he had controlled every room he entered with intimidation, with confidence, with the certainty that his badge would always protect him from consequences. But badges looked smaller inside federal courtrooms. Naomi Ellis slowly approached the evidence table once more and lifted a final folder marked confidential. "Your Honor," she said carefully, "the government would now like to submit corroborating testimony from former Richmond Police Department personnel regarding Officer Mercer's conduct and the suppression of internal complaints." Judge Raymond Keller nodded once. "Proceed." One by one, former officers appeared on the courtroom monitor through recorded depositions collected during the federal investigation. Retired dispatchers described altered incident logs. Former patrol officers admitted complaints involving Mercer routinely disappeared before reaching internal affairs. One former supervisor testified that younger officers were quietly warned not to report discriminatory behavior if they wanted promotions to continue. Every statement tightened the atmosphere further around the defense table. Mercer's attorney attempted several objections, but each was overruled almost immediately. The pattern had become impossible to ignore. It was not one incident, not one mistake. It was years. Years of silence protecting years of abuse. Then Naomi introduced the final witness statement. Sergeant Colin Reeves, the same man who once defended Mercer behind closed doors. His recorded testimony filled the courtroom speakers in a tired voice stripped of excuses. Everybody knew complaints followed Daniel Mercer, Reeves admitted quietly. But most people convinced themselves it was easier not to challenge him. Angela lowered her eyes briefly as those words settled across the room. Easier. That single word explained 6 years of pain better than any report ever could. Easier to ignore grieving families. Easier to trust authority over truth. Easier to protect systems instead of people. Naomi finally stepped back from the evidence table and faced the judge directly. Your Honor, this case is not only about one officer. It is about what happens when prejudice is protected by silence. The courtroom remained completely still. Judge Keller removed his glasses slowly before turning toward Daniel Mercer. His voice carried through the room with controlled authority. Officer Mercer, after reviewing the evidence presented before this court, including altered body camera footage, witness intimidation, discriminatory conduct, and obstruction of previous investigations, this court finds sufficient grounds for immediate federal action. Mercer looked up sharply now, panic finally breaking through the confidence he had worn like armor for years. Your Honor, this is political, he blurted out. This entire thing is political. But even his own voice sounded smaller now. Desperate. Judge Keller's expression never changed. No, Officer Mercer. This is accountability. 2 federal marshals, standing near the rear courtroom doors, immediately stepped forward. Reporters scrambled for clearer views while whispers exploded quietly through the gallery. Mercer rose halfway from his chair, stunned disbelief spreading across his face as the reality of the moment finally crashed into him. The same man who once stood over grieving families believing they had no power now stood surrounded by consequences he could not control. Angela watched silently while the marshals approached the defense table. No smile crossed her face. No celebration. Only exhaustion. The kind carried by people who spend years fighting battles nobody else wanted to see. As Mercer was escorted away, he glanced back toward Angela one final time. Maybe he expected anger, hatred, satisfaction. But Angela only looked at him with quiet sadness. Because deep down she understood something he never did. People like Mercer were not destroyed in a single day. They were destroyed slowly by every truth they thought would stay buried forever. Hours later, as the sun finally broke through the clouds above Richmond,